Okay, if you could all take your seats, please, so we can have our next session.
Yeah, much better.
Thank you for being prompt with your afternoon tea. We have another panel session this afternoon where we're looking at what are the next steps, I guess, or what are the implications of the State of Air report on policy. So in this panel session, we have 4 panellists. So 2 of those panel members are ex-politicians from Victoria, so ex-Premier Ted and Honourable Member Robin, and Lidia and Tunga are also joining us. So we're going to have a short presentation each from Ted and Robin from politicians' perspective of air quality. And then we'll open up to panel discussion. So we'll look at what are some policy and regulation things that we might want to consider. I have a few questions prepared, but we'll also obviously open it up to the floor. This session will go to about 4:45, and then Lidia will close with some closing remarks before we have some drinks and fireside chat type things or something afterwards. Okay, so first of all, Ted, would you like to come and speak?
It doesn't work. Thanks so much, Wendy. And can I say up front, this is a fantastic addition to the whole campaign. It's not perfect. I don't think anyone would suggest it's perfect, nor is it complete. And the notion that this be subject to triennial review, I think, is a powerful one. But I wanted to put that up front because this is a terrific addition. But I also just want to ask a couple of questions of the audience first. Who here is from overseas? We've got a few. Huh? Who's here from interstate? Who's a really good person from Victoria? Okay. Who is a politician? We've got Amanda from New South Wales, the upper house. Got one. And a couple of exes. We might be from other sides of politics, but even when we were sitting across the benches, we also got on quite well. So there's no issue there. Who's in the public sector? Who's academic? Researchers. Who's in the private sector? Okay, so we do have a good mix of people. And why am I here? I'm an architect in another life, had an architectural practice, also was a non-executive director of a real estate company which owned a facilities management company for many years and started one of those. And I'm old enough, probably I may be one of the oldest in the room, I think, these days, but I'm old enough to have been educated by an architectural school where natural ventilation was a critical issue, which we contemplated almost every day. And it was just automatic for me to think natural ventilation, to think cross ventilation. And that's how I grew up. It's how I've approached everything I've done in property and buildings since. The world changed when we sealed up apartment buildings and we sealed up offices. And as a result, we've got some new good things and some new bad things. But I also, after I left being Premier of Victoria, the then Labor government, Robin's government, asked me to co-chair the cladding task force in Victoria, which I did with a member of the other side of politics. We've known each other for a long time, and that got me into building quality, and that took me to the UK on building quality. I'm still fighting those battles in the UK and fighting those battles here. And during a COVID epidemic, the pandemic, I went out of my way. I thought I'm going to give the federal government of the day my 2 bobs worth, and I wrote a paper for Greg Hunt, and Greg got a mention. I think Lidia mentioned Greg contacted her. I don't know whether there was any correlation with what I do with Greg, but I wrote a long paper about the merits of what we could do with ventilation to mitigate COVID spread. Greg, to his credit, at least passed me to the Prime Minister's office. and this is an off-the-record comment because this isn't going anywhere publicly, is it, Lidia? Suffice to say, I was sidelined in that exercise, and it's a great pity because I think we could have gone on to some of the issues earlier. So I have maintained my interest in this subject to a great deal, and I've spoken at many conferences as a consequence, and along the way I've been prosecuting a couple of cases, and one of those cases is we need to come together with a unified message more. And secondly, we have to get the decision makers involved. And I just want to touch on a couple of things and forgive the boring PowerPoint. But if you look at the current key players in this exercise, and if you look at the front of the document there, you'll see you've got the Academy of Science on the front page, you've got Burnett on the front page, and a few others. I didn't know them all. I didn't know much about Kazans myself. I didn't know much about the Clean Air Project, and I didn't know much about HEAL either. So I looked in the document. There isn't much in the document about that, and that might be something that could be considered in the next edition, a little more explanation. Most of them have had a focus materially on outdoor air and pollution in particular, and in the broader environment. What's fantastic about this document is it's labelled indoor air quality. And indoor is mentioned several hundred times, I think, in the document. Outdoor gets a couple of mentions, not too many, normally related, but not too many. The other interesting thing is that this is considering the 10 classes of building, normally 10 classes, looking at the material in it, and looking at the 10 contaminants, is that the right word? And making a judgment about that. What's missing? What's missing in the report struck out for me and stuck out. And there's barely a mention of pathogens. I understand that in the context of the way the report's constructed. We hear fundamentally, because we've had what Brendan Crabb called an explosion of interest in the last 5 years, and that's pandemic-based. And if it's pandemic-based, then we need to keep reminding ourselves that that's what's brought the public attention to this issue. And we can't measure pathogens yet. Somehow or other we can measure them in the sewage system. We're not yet at the stage, perhaps it's going to come, where we'll be able to measure the pathogens in the air. What's also not there is public transport, because public transport doesn't fit into a building class. And that is equally significant in my view. Now, there are other players in the space as well, and I'm not going to go into them in any detail, other than to say that's just a few of them. There are new ones coming on board all the time. And as a consequence, we're getting different messages from different places. And it's all in a regulatory environment. The Thrive have set it out in this report really well, pretty much where it's all at. And this report is really adding to what we've got. And we've heard about 1668 in the last session a lot. But between the states, there's still a lot of inconsistencies. And as a consequence, we've got a lot of outstanding issues. And the lead one of those is we don't have a commitment from decision makers. And that's a problem. And along the way, we've had so many conferences that we've almost normalised inaction. Along the way, we've created a cottage industry of alarm bells. And that in turn creates a kind of institutional inertia. And I want you to think about the way governments operate. And I say to people, governments engage with you in 3 ways. They engage up, which is they're on board. They engage sideways, where they're taking you sideways. Well, we'll consult our colleagues interstate, we'll consult so and so on. And they engage down. And they'll stack and string to you, meetings that won't matter, meetings they'll never learn about. That's what was done to me by the federal government when I was pushing for it. And as a consequence of that, you get further fragmentation. And somehow, in my view, we're struggling to keep up internationally. Save for, we've had some really prominent drivers. Lydia and her team, we've heard from some of them today, Bronwyn and everybody who's put the UNGA event together. And there have been some really positive developments. Obviously, this report is right up there. Meeting that was held with the Prime Minister 18 months ago, I think it was now, which was very significant. There's a proposed federal ministerial meeting, but that's now apparently going to just be with an advisor. That's a bit of sideways. The research funds that the Victorian government put into Burnett, that was a tribute, the research funds that went into Thrive and producing this report. And the UNGA conference that we just saw a teaser about, which was a couple of weeks ago, 330 people attended, probably the best attended side event at the United Nations General Assembly this year. And I've been at a United Nations General Assembly on another issue with some people in this room, and the side events are a big deal. This one, just gone, was a very big deal. But it also included, and you saw some of that if you were looking hard, there were represented at that conference from the WHO, the ILO, the UN Environment Programme, including the United Nations Head of Climate in Climate Week, and they were there. And that conference was organised by Australians with the help of the French government and the Montenegrin government, if that's the way to say it. And the other thing that's happened, if you're paying attention over the last couple of years, there's much more social media on this issue, and it's internationally. The involvement of Safe Work and the developments there, which Liam was talking about, I think are a very positive thing. And this conference, I think, is a positive thing as well. But we've had some setbacks. And I don't want to undersell the significance of these. None of the decision makers who could have attended that conference, the UNGA conference, did. Prime Minister was there, 3 ministers were there, senior representatives of the Australian government were there at a side event led by Australians with the Australian Academy of Science as well and others. And they chose consciously not to attend. Now that's a setback. Had a federal reshuffle, and we had Jed Carney, who was very much on board. She's now off in another portfolio, so that engagement has to start again. And on top of that, there are some adverse forces still going on. Construction costs are a big issue in this country. We were sitting here before talking about the nature of HVAC systems and the closed windows and everything and the cost of it all. That's an issue. It's a big issue for governments around the country. Federal government's chosen to freeze any changes to the National Construction Code for 2 years. Personally, I think that's a silly move. Both sides of politics seem to have thought it was a good idea. I don't. There are budget pressures at every level, so money's tight. But there are state elections in 3 states in the next 12 months. You also have some division amongst interest groups about the value of CO2 as a proxy, what should be measured, how it should be measured. There's various views about technology. We listened to just some of the various views about the way to go in some particular building types. We've got a range of mixed messages. We've got diverse representation. We, as much as we're trying to get people to speak with one voice, from a government point of view, gosh, we're being bombarded by different voices. And that makes it very easy for government. We've had a hell of a lot of conferences. Somebody asked the question quite pertinently early on, what are we going to do to make the next step? Why is it we haven't got this far? And I suspect there's two reasons for that, because we've tolerated engagement down and because the messages we've been sending collectively have made it very easy for government to resist. And that's fragmentation versus clear leadership. We're talking indoor, we're talking outdoor, what is the objective, what are the risk standards we're all agreed on, what are the agreed metrics, where are we up to with masks, is the pandemic still a risk, and who you talk to, who wants to tell you that they think it is or not. We've started to focus, and even in this report, we've started to focus on issues which aren't directly related to that driver, which was the pandemic in the first place. And if you go through this report in detail, who's read it? Okay, it looks like it's a tome, but it's actually quite systemised, and it's not difficult once you've got into it. I spent a bit of time with it, and it's been self-described as a baseline report. And it's been described by speakers here as a baseline report. Didn't ask the question, are there any journos in the room? I don't think there are any journos. Any aspiring journos? What does it mean? You've got a report here with a lot of information in it. And if you're a journo, you pick this report up and you say, these goodies I've got here exclusively. And you can go to those goodies and you can, some describe them as low-hanging fruit during the day. And we go from baseline report to headline report. And the headlines that jump out of this are, let's do away with wood fires. Let's do away with gas heaters. Let's do away with gas cooking. And you can go through all the various classes. And some of the boxes get positive ticks. And this is being very mindful that the data produced is broad, but I think it's fair to say it's broad but narrow. It's not comprehensive, but there are teasers and it asks questions. You can reach conclusions here, and some have actually drawn those conclusions from having a look at what it's about. And if you go further, you're looking at factories, the factory classes, one of them is class 8 or 7 or 8 or whatever it is. And breweries, microbreweries pop up. You know, getting a hold of that. Whoa! Microbreweries are closing all over the country at the moment for other reasons. My goodness, they must be dangerous places to work as well. We've got to be careful we maintain a core message. And I am certainly not of the view that the pandemic is over. In fact, if you ask politicians what they're most fearful of in all of this debate, it's the next pandemic. And if we're asking politicians to make the decisions to get everybody on board, that's what we've got to focus on. And so there are lots of other issues that have been raised. They're all fairly raised. But what do we need above all? And others have said it as well. A clear message, a simple message, a united message, coordinated action, and a bit of effective funding. It doesn't have to be a lot. We've got bits and pieces being spread around at the moment. Thrive have done well with their research funding. I'm sure Burnett's will be very effective as well. But we've got to get the decision makers on board. We've got to get a commitment. We've got to get a responsible minister. And when I wrote to Greg Hunt, whenever it was, 5 years ago or something, I called for a multidisciplinary task force. This is just me off the top of the list. And I called for this strange person that I'd heard about called Lidia Morawska to head it up. She seemed to be on the right track. I'd still be calling for that. But to urge everybody to get on board, don't get sidetracked, and don't allow the decision makers to say, oh no, we've heard from somebody else. And don't tolerate engagement down or engagement sideways. You've got to get to the top. And some of you have heard me on the subject of irresistible advice. It's what we've got to be messaging to the decision makers. And the last thing I want to ask is a couple of questions. go home questions about ventilation. Point to the north. Show of hands, point to the north. Which way is north? Not so confident, okay. We're in Victoria. Point to the source of the prevailing wind. North that way, prevailing winds from this quarter. When we talk about natural ventilation, no one talks about prevailing wind. So when you go home, you'll probably be having a shower, probably got a exhaust fan over the shower. You might not have thought about it. Where's it exhaust to? Once upon a time, we exhausted through the attic and out to the air. In recent decades, we've just exhausted to the ceiling space. And that's now considered normal. What happens in the ceiling space? The fungal growth to hold us. We've got a visitor from New Zealand here, Mikhail, and he can tell you about sick building syndrome in New Zealand. $25 billion, I think, or $30 billion it's cost New Zealand government to fix that fungal growth and deadly fungal growth. Who's got, quick show of hands, who's got an exhaust fan over their cooktop? Where's it exhaust to? You go to an apartment building, a new apartment building, most just recycle. And those that exhaust, just exhaust to the nearest exhaust, the nearest point. And probably 2/3 of those will be facing directly into the prevailing wind and will be a waste of time. So the little things. Perhaps in question time, I'll tell a bit more about apartments, but how do we get to these, how do we get the decisions made we need made? How do we stay track one and we engage up, sideways and down with the decision makers? I'll leave it there. I'm sure Robin will have something far more significant because of his long experience in government. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Ted. Robin, would you like to address us for a moment? And then after that, I'll ask both of them for a hypothetical if they were in federal government now.
State politicians are always happy to answer for federal people and then not take responsibility for the consequences. But let me start by saying I think we are at a reasonably critical point because there has been progress, and Brendan Crabb talked about 50%, but I think there's plenty of times where 50% turns into 100, but there's also plenty of times it turns to 51 and stops. So it's the point in time where there's heightened awareness amongst a small group of people. I think it would be foolhardy, and I'll choose my words carefully, to believe that that has spread into the popular consciousness or is spread far amongst decision makers at the highest levels to the point where they're taking action. So I think we are at a point where there's been quite a lot achieved, and I don't want to be actually negative. I think a lot of people have done really great work, but it is a difficult transition to move from where we are now to achieving meaningful change across the society. I would say there are places where it's changing. There's a great science fiction writer, William Gibson, said the future exists, it's just not evenly distributed. And that's true. If you go to Davos and meet amongst the billionaires, the air's fantastically clean. It's very safe. So there's a very small group of highly educated, highly aware people. They live in the world that we'd hope to bring to the rest of the society. It's not unusual. It's quite common, actually, that sort of environment exists. But I would hope the people who gather this room would want to spread the benefits beyond people who charter jets to get around, because that's the sort of people who go to that meeting. And we have an obligation, I think, because of the moral consequences of the knowledge that people here have and the sort of stakes that are involved, which are literally the lives of millions of people across the world over time. of whether we're successful in advocating and whether the paradigm, people talk about the paradigm shifts all the time. I think this is a really good example of a paradigm shift, and paradigm shifts are a bit like bankruptcy, slow and then fast. So, you know, it's about shifting and then it moves very quickly, but we're not at that point. We're being honest, I think, where at a decision making and at a central level, there's been the shift has occurred. And it's very common for ideas which are actually quite discredited amongst an expert audience to continue for a long time. Public policy, that's not an unusual occurrence. And there are reasons for that. So I think first thing I'd say from a decision maker's perspective, and that's I think the benefit that people like myself and Ted can bring. We're not scientists. We're not a little bit involved in research, but I'd certainly not claim to be at the level the number of the people here are. I think the most critical thing is to empathise with those decision makers and empathise with people in the broader society who are not on board. Sometimes that's they don't know about it, or sometimes that's, I think there's a lot of people, and COVID was mentioned. I'd put a slightly different take than Ted did. I'm still very concerned about the impact of COVID, but I think people often don't want to know. They had such a traumatic experience that it's just a complete block, and it impacts for a lot of political actors. They don't want to deal with issues relating to COVID. So I'd caution that I certainly think that transmission of respiratory diseases in indoor environments is a critical reason to take action, but it may be that an indirect approach is more successful, that other issues that arise in relation to these matters are going to be successful in persuading decision makers to take action, or in fact persuading decision makers that the costs of action are less than the cost of inaction in a range of circumstances. I'd certainly agree with what Ted was saying, that there are risks in communicating messages which are contradictory and not having a focus. I think that's a really significant risk at this point. So the other thing I want to say is that there's a risk in diffusion. And people have talked about, and I was quite pleased to hear it, about narrowing a set of points of interest to some areas where there's, this is not what was said, but the way I describe it, where there's the greatest legitimacy and social licence for change. And the obvious issue, I would agree with what was raised by other speakers, you know, around education, around the welfare of children and the benefits to education of children of clean air, as well as disease, the impact of disease on children. Then you've got the issues around aged care, childcare, high hospital settings, high risk settings where I think it's much easier to generate social licence. I think the chance of a decision maker, say a minister, authorising, and I'm a fan, I have to say, it might be my biases because I was Occupational Health and Safety Minister. I think the occupational health and safety system is a great avenue forward, and I agree with people like Liam, because the regulatory environment jumps into an existence. And you don't have to invent inspectors, you don't have to invent a set of penalties, you don't have to invent things. Once there's a standard and there's head of power for standards already in legislation, once there's regs that exist and have been accepted by the regulators, immediately safe air regulatory system jumps into existence. So I think why we have to be cognizant, though, is why would that happen, and why would people not want to do that? If you're a decision maker and you're imposing on the entire society a new set of regulations that are enforceable, that's a very significant thing to do. A lot of risk in that, a lot of cost potentially in that. So I think from my own perspective, and having lived on the other side of that decision-making process, selecting areas where you're going to have the most likelihood of success, concentrating some activity on those, having clear asks that are implementable. And I listened to some of the other discussion earlier this morning about the complexity. And I have to say I had some trepidation around that discussion, because you need to have regulations that are enforceable across the society. If the idea is that every building, you know, and that's implicit in some discussion, I don't think what people mean, you'll have to bring in an engineer, you'll have to do, it's not going to happen. Okay? I'll be brutally honest, it's not going to happen. 1 in 10 people on studies that I've been involved with about in numeracy can identify a third as a decimal. A lot of small business owners who have legal duties, if they can't acquit those duties, they're not going to happen. So we need to find ways to achieve outcomes in settings where it's realistic, can be achieved, and it's meaningful. And we also need to change the paradigm of how we talk about these issues. There's a bit of discussion that's been around education, and there's some good evidence that's emerging about the benefits of clean air in terms of reducing absenteeism, including in teachers. Victorian government, and the figures, I haven't seen latest figures, but sort of something in the order of $400 million a year is spent on replacement teachers. And in a whole range of other industries in the public sector. If I'm sitting down talking to a minister, I have the benefits. You can save money. We can demonstrate this. There are mechanisms that are available to achieve, to quantify savings, certainly in a Victorian context. It's not necessarily in all other states and jurisdictions, but we have to empathise, the points being made as advocates have to solve the problems that the decision makers face, have to address their concerns, have to empathise with what are the challenges that they face. And so I think we are at a critical moment. I think a lot has been achieved, and I really want to commend all the people involved. I mean, to get meetings with the Prime Minister, to have investments, and I'd be slightly more positive in one sense, there's a bubbling away research that's going on. I'm talking particularly from a Victorian perspective that's been funded by government. There's what's the ARC's funding of Thrive. There's a range of things that have been achieved, and the benefits can be extraordinary. But this is important. I really want to emphasise, it's important, but we have to persuade other people. And if you're not succeeding, not many companies survive by blaming their customers. So you have to reassess and think about how do you achieve those goals. Because it's not as though we've failed, and I actually really want to make that point, but we haven't stepped simply into an immediate, and there's reasons for that. This is big change in many ways that people want to achieve. It's very significant. I see Bronwyn here, how many decades on tobacco, and people knew a long, long time ago about tobacco. In fact, I think James I wrote an essay on it in the early 17th century. But
Email.
Sorry,
Email.
Yes, a counterblast of tobacco, as I recall, was his title. But I wouldn't ascribe to all James's ideas. He was pretty fond of burning women alive for being witches. So yeah, let's not use him as the sole scientific authority. However, these are difficult journeys, but the more that we are strategic, the more that we are able to focus on where we can win. You win in an area, particularly in occupational health and safety. If you win in one area, the chances are you win across the board ultimately. It's about opening a door. You open the door, and then you can force your way through across it. Force the way is a wrong analogy, but you can create change across the whole society. But if it's diffuse, we can be here in another 25 years. And probably most of the people will be a new set of people with some veterans here. But if we're not careful, that can happen. So I think we need to be clear what we're trying to achieve, and I'd certainly echo Ted's words. We need to be clear what we're asking for, and it needs to be something that can be achieved. Because expecting people just to change the whole society and how it functions in every workplace, imposing significant costs across the board, just like that because we want it, is very unrealistic unless you've got a clear understanding of how you've legitimated that and created the social licence. And there's good reasons to preach to the choir, for all sorts of reasons, not just so they sing from the same voice, but it also gives people the momentum, the sense of purpose, often these are lonely, difficult tasks to persuade people. There's good reason to meet amongst friends and to give each other support, but there's also a risk in it, that you lose the perspective perspective of the people who aren't already persuaded. So I just urge everyone, and I'll stop speaking in a second, but I'll urge everyone to have clarity, to try and find the openings. I'm very agnostic. I mean, if people got better ideas, fantastic, about where we should proceed, but to seek those areas where it's possible to achieve change and it's possible to persuade people because it is in their interest, not because you're coming in and lecturing them. And I'd also come in and say, the social license for social controls subsequent to COVID is something people should also be very cognizant of. There's a significant reduction. Right? People don't want to be told what to do. They have plenty of it. So how this is framed has got to be in a very positive way, because this is ultimately about giving people more freedom. If you are sick less often, if your child who has asthma doesn't have asthma attacks, if you are able to participate fully, if you've got a disability in a circumstance where otherwise you wouldn't be able, that's giving more freedom. But we've got to be careful not to be a group of people who come across as imposing a worldview that people haven't yet agreed to and wanting to impose a series of sanctions. It's a huge risk subsequent to COVID, right? Because people have lived through losing a lot of freedoms for the benefit of others. And I have to say, a lot of history is being rewritten as if we had vaccines in early 2020. Right? And in terms of some of those discourses. So the assumptions that come out of those debates are important to understand, because we will not get political decision makers and actors to impose a new set of regulatory instruments on people if they're perceived to be fettering them too much. So the construct, in my view, has to be around giving people freedom, freedom from illness, freedom to participate fully from the society. Children who've got, as I said, got asthma, being free to not have asthma attacks is a pretty good freedom. People to cognitively perform who are from low-income households in schools that are poorly ventilated currently, and where windows are often painted closed. And there's no mechanical ventilation. Those things are sort of framework. If I was going to decision makers, I'd be putting the frame around. And we can't make it that this is if we're framing around the complexity of it. It's complex, and as important it is to get the specs right, because I think that is actually critical, the specifications, because if we look at interventions, and I was involved in it, of getting HEPA filters into schools in Victoria, they were too noisy, so people turned them off. That's the brutal reality in schools. So you've got to get you've got to get the technical work right, but that's not the communication frame that will succeed. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay, so let's get down to practical things and not the complexity. So in the report and in a lot of scientific papers, we know that gas appliances are a problem. So I want you to hypothetically think that Ted, Robin and Lidia, you are the leaders of the three main political parties in the current federal government. I won't say which party, but each of you are the leader of one of the parties. So I'm going to ask each of you a regulation or a policy question, and I just want you to answer yes or no if you would support this policy. Okay, so the first regarding gas appliances. So in Victoria, your gas appliances must be externally flued. That is not the case, as far as I know, in any other state. In Queensland, you can put a gas appliance in, it doesn't have to be flued outside. So would you support mandating nationally that all gas appliances must be externally flued? Yes or no?
Yes.
Not until there's social licence. We need to tell people why.
Yes. Second question is, so in the UK, I intimated earlier that all residential rooms that have a combustion device, so this is gas or wood, must have a CO2 sensor. would you approve of mandating a CO2 sensor in every residential space and or school space, including childcare, that has a gas appliance? Yes or no?
No.
Robin?
I can't give a simple one because I think schools, yes, homes, no, until the social license is created.
It's too complicated to answer yes or no.
Haha.
There are pathways, so there's not just yes.
So question number 3, would you support a policy to buy back gas appliances from from residential or school properties, and for residential starting with households where someone in the household has a respiratory disease, and then maybe extending to low-income households or something like that? So buyback scheme, or replacing a gas appliance with an electric appliance. Yes or no?
No.
It's very hard to give yes or no answers to these things. In certain circumstances, yes, but probably at this point, no. I don't think there's the money in it. You would not get through cabinet. It's not going to happen.
Yes.
Question number 4. So I understand.
No.
So I understand in Victoria now that residential new housing developments don't have to connect to gas, can't connect to gas.
That's not true anymore.
Not true anymore.
Was going to be, but it's not the case.
People walked in.
Okay, so I'll just rephrase the question. Should the National Construction Code was thinking on 2028 whether to go towards a full electrification of housing, or whether to encourage the electrification of housing but allow for gas? Would you support a full electrification of housing going forward? So no gas in housing going forward, yes or no?
I've already answered the question.
Yeah, you say no to everything.
Okay, my wife is Chinese. You can't cook properly with a wok on electricity. So, I would be divorced if I introduced that. But it's quite serious. This is everyone laughs, but it's not a laughing matter. If people cook with gas as part of a cultural process and regard electricity as substandard, then there's actually an issue.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I was recently at a place where they were using induction woks.
Yeah, no, but I assure you that my wife's friends do not think induction woks cut the mustard.
No? Yes. Okay, so now for the audience. So
I just pause you there when
no?
very good, very good.
So hypothetically, you as the audience are the Australian people. You are trying to determine who you're going to vote for at the next election, and you're giving all the candidates your opinions on how to improve air quality in our buildings. So the same questions to you. So just a show of hands, who here would support mandating that any gas appliances that go into any residential and or preschool setting must be flued?
Yeah.
Okay, question number 2, who would support mandating CO sensors in all homes that have gas appliances or wood fire heaters? So this is carbon monoxide sensors. Mandating carbon
CO2,
But you said CO2 before.
sorry.
CO2 monitors.
Okay.
It's a different,
I said no.
yeah, it's a different question.
Okay, question number 3. Would you support buyback schemes for enabling people to replace gas or wood fire heaters, cooking devices, with an electric appliance? Yes or no? Yes. Okay, and question number 4, would you support a policy where there is no gas in new builds? Okay, interesting. Thank you.
We've got a question.
Okay, sure. So you're allowed now, yes.
Do you agree that the headline takeout of this research report should be the issue of gas appliances? Who says yes? Who says no? Nyan, nyan, nyan.
I'll ask the question differently. Who thinks that addressing gas appliances would be a large step in moving forward on the health of our population? Yes. No?
Yeah, it's actually
It's a mix of things there.
We've been cooking and heating with gas for a very long time. It's manageable if it's done properly. But to manage it properly, you have to have the people educated. And when we first introduced gas appliances, we were well educated because you had to be. And we've lost a lot of that. And now a lot of gas appliances, they might be ventilated outside, but they're ventilated directly into the prevailing wind and are ineffective as vents. And if I can just foreshadow that I might tell this story. We just over 2 years ago, we had a national cabinet. National cabinet was introduced by Scott Morrison, roll my eyes, in place of COAG, Council of Australian Governments. Council of Australian Governments had long-term agendas, set agendas, papers circulated, involved local government, involved the executive at every government. It was a cumbersome process. I went through it with the National Disability Insurance Scheme. Not perfect, but there was a lot of involvement. Turned in a national cabinet during the pandemic. It's now summoned at a moment's notice for a moment's issue, and a national cabinet was called on housing affordability. It was held over 3 hours, local government not involved, the executive not involved, no papers in advance or out of it. And they emerged from the national cabinet. It lasted a few hours, and our previous Victorian Premier was pretty good at the PR. He went straight to the cameras first and announced we're going to have 800,000 new homes in Victoria in 10 years, I think it was. And he said, we're going to do away with heritage controls and we're going to do away with local government involvement, and that's it. And a few weeks later, that was formalised in the Housing Accord in Victoria and became the epistle from on high. And then Daniel, in his wisdom, a week later, epistles off himself. And that's now the case. And it's high-rise, high-density. No consideration of whether that's the best form of housing or the cost of it. And when you think Victoria University have already declared 90% of recently built apartment buildings fail fire safety standards, and 50% have serious systemic defects beyond cladding, the chances of having adequate ventilation of appliances when you've got a unilateral decision like that made, that's the wrong way around. So if you're getting bad buildings as a consequence of bad decision making up the top of the tree, nuances are going to be lost along the way.
So one of my purposes of asking the gas question is that it's really in Australia a contextual issue. So in Queensland, it is not uncommon to have all electric houses. But we have not had gas heaters, and we don't necessarily have gas cookers either. So the concept of having all electric houses and it all being renewable powered or something is not foreign.
You don't have heaters in Queensland.
Oh, often, no, I don't have a heater.
Yeah, there you go.
That's right. So when we're looking at solutions,
fire, so
in a lot of country areas they still do, but in lots of our solutions are also going to be contextual to what is the culture of the particular region that we're in. Are you in regional Tasmania, where there are actually quite a few wood heaters and wood stoves still being used, as opposed to Victoria, where you use a gas heating is common, and centralised air conditioning or even split systems are not as common as for heating purposes, but are becoming more common. So the gas issue is a contextual one, but it is potentially one that we can address ill health for respiratory diseases quite easily, because there are options to gas.
Could I just say, it's easy to do, but I don't think, and people walked back a decision on environmental grounds on gas in Victoria, because I'll make an observation. I'm loath to give too much commentary on the government I used to be a part of, but but there's a social licence issue. I think there's a real problem of experts imposing rules without taking the community on, as a broad on discussion and debate of why it should be done. You know, so I think if I was to say around the gas issue, I didn't put gas in the home, and we do use an electric wok. They are slightly problematic. They're not quite as good as gas, I have to say. But we had to spend more to get a very expensive induction cooker that could handle the wok and get some electricals done. I'm not joking either. Some quite, you know, expensive power changes so you could do it. But it's a real risk that if you don't take people on a journey, if you're not having a discussion of why it's an issue, if you're not talking about why there are problems, what the health concerns are, you're frankly helping political forces and Ted's not one of them, but I'm describing the people who are the populists who want to delegitimate expertise as people who just want to be, to use the modern term, Karens telling everyone how to live their life, right? You know, so it's a real risk. I'll give another piece of advice: do not fall into that trap. If you want to impose something on the whole society, you have to persuade the community that it's something needs to be done and why it's an important issue. And you have to be open and engage in a process that's something more than elite capture and then imposing things on people.
The obvious takeouts of the detailed parts of this report pop out as gas appliances, wood fires, cafes, restaurants, and a couple of other things. I would hope that we know that this report doesn't devolve to becoming get rid of gas appliances, get rid of wood fires, get rid of cafes, get rid of restaurants.
That's not what the report says at all.
No, but that's what when you read the figures, you're a journalist and you're reading the figures in here, that's what you can conclude. So
I would
that's the
think only if you were a dumb journalist.
Well,
That's okay.
it's just you're raising the gas issue
Yes.
because it's in the report. Okay, I read the report and they jumped out to me. Those 4 things, I wrote them down. I didn't mention them all. And breweries, microbreweries popped out as well when I was reading the numbers. I read it all. And then somebody was at the microphone talking about microbreweries. I thought, oh, well, I'm not the only one. So journalists, smart journalists, are going to pick it up, find the figures. And these are very narrow. They're not over long term, and all the conditions that were put on the report are correct. But the report is a fantastic baseline document. Don't let it err on the side of the headlines that might come out of it and degrade the basis of the report as a consequence.
There's a term.
Lidia, you were wanting to say something.
Well, I wanted to say a few things. The discussion is going in many different directions. I think the biggest picture of this is that if we want to implement something now immediately and we worry that this won't be accepted, of course it won't be accepted, but we never should try to implement something as of tomorrow. That's not possible. So there's always a lead time. And in that lead time, you create social acceptance and so on. But it is not with this, okay, do you accept this? And maybe you don't accept this. We are going in that direction. And that's why, and as of next month, next year, as of 2 years, that's how it's going to be. Seatbelt, where we asking about social acceptance of this. I don't like this, you don't like this. Well, that's how it's going to be. And as of that time, it's going to be. So that's what it is. And with whatever aspect we are talking about, whether it's gas appliances, maybe you like it cooking, you don't like it cooking. We are going in this direction for 2 reasons, because it's health and it's fossil fuel, and that fossil fuel is not a substitute for anything else. So 10 years from now, say, or whatever, we are not going to have it. In the meantime, you will find out how you are going to cook so you like it, or how you are going to do something else. So you need to see you are going there, you are building social license, you are preparing everything, that you'll get there.
Does anybody see a potential future where, perhaps first, hands up if you or someone in your family has a respiratory illness of some sort? And keep your hands up. Anyone who has cardiovascular illnesses or conditions of any sort, as well as, so I want to keep your hands up if it's respiratory, and add to that if there's cardiovascular things. Can you save a time, so this is the people with their hands up, where your GP or practitioner might ask you, do you have a gas appliance at home, or do you work with diesel machinery at work? Can you see a time when your medical practitioner might ask those questions about where you live and where you work and prescribe or suggest to you that removing those things from your life may help your disease? So sort of a yes, no. Do you think that that's a way whereby the medical practitioners can go down the track of helping with this? So
That's fine. That's personally empowering.
Okay. And that's part of the social.
Yeah, and I'd agree with Lidia, except with one flip. I think you have to get the social license as part of the immediate. That process isn't immediate. That we've got this issue, and you have to highlight the issues. Why? There's no doubt. I mean, not no doubt, but I think the evidence is overwhelming as a layperson of some of the risks of particulates in indoor environments. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sitting here. But I don't think that's a commonly held view as of yet. So that task is the journey that we're on, and political social license, sort of saying, has been set back in a way by COVID. You know, there is less tolerance of social imposition of rules. So, and a delegitimisation of expertise in the broader society. So I think that's the first task. You know, the highlighting of the issues and the creating of the social license is the first task. And if you achieve that, the next is actually quite easy. And it may not be technically easy, but it's quite easy to get outcomes in the society. So I think this telling of the story of what the problems are and that there are solutions is the journey. And that is the direction. You are heading in that direction, but it's not, we will do this to you. So what's the empowerment in that, to take Ted's point?
If the federal government was capable of switching off gas completely in this country and not exporting gas or coal or anything else of its ilk and surviving, you might have an argument. But to pick and choose at the personal convenient level to try and fill the gap of that broader decision, I think that would be an act of institutional suicide. I think that.
So Lidia, I want to ask you that in your blueprint paper that was published last year, you and your co-authors suggested a blueprint for public buildings. So we're not talking all buildings, public buildings, for CO2 and PM 2.5 monitoring. Why? Can you explain perhaps briefly why those two in particular, and how might a staged approach to that be implemented?
Not just two, there were four. So it was PM 2.5, CO2. There was also CO, but it was stated that CO in buildings there's combustion, or if outdoor concentrations exceed national standards, and ventilation rate in mechanically ventilated buildings. Now, just this and not a whole range of others, because we don't have technological solutions for monitoring them at scale yet. There are low-cost sensors for basically any kind of pollutant, but they are not at the level that they can be just placed and scaled. For these three pollutants, this is possible. So that's how it was. Now, the next stage was the levels, recommended levels. However, we stated very clearly that every jurisdictions will choose their own levels, but the levels are perhaps not the most important. The most important is how those levels were derived, because this shows jurisdictions how to derive the levels. I was involved in the setting WHO guidelines, the current guidelines, the previous guidelines, and understand this process, as well as early in the piece NEPAM standards. So that's the process is the most important. So this is this blueprint. But the next one on which we are working now is, okay, we have this, but what is the pathway now? And that pathway exactly is like this. This is not going to happen as of tomorrow, you have to start. And I'll be talking about this more on Wednesday, but basically it is first start monitoring without needing to report anything, but with the oversight of the government, because there are millions of companies and everybody proposed, well, do it this, my device and that way. So it's got to be done such that it makes sense. After that period is completed and everybody is monitoring, then is the reporting standard. So we still don't have to comply with this, but report. And there's a precedence of this. When in 2003, PM 2.5 standard was introduced in Australia, it was a reporting standard. And it was only in 2016, if I remember correctly, when it became standard. So this gives time, jurisdictions, or in this case, institutions, and then it becomes standard, so mandated standard. So this is this pathway. And again, different organizations, different states may choose the time, may choose how to do it, but this is basically the pathway. That was the question.
So it's monitoring, and my understanding is that part of the purpose of monitoring is to help build the social license to be able to do things, because how do we build the social license unless there's evidence that people can see, well, this is the air quality that we have, therefore we need to change.
Can you ask first the question about that, which we understood CO2 in
Yes, that was my mistake.
and then putting CO2 everywhere straight away. Where, okay, you put CO2, but if people don't understand what's the purpose, what to do with this, so they won't use it. And so it has to be in particular in private buildings. So private buildings, of course, it's very important in terms of air quality, but what we are saying that must be designed so that they can meet in the air quality, but we cannot impose that this is.
I should perhaps ask the question again about gas appliances. Would you approve a policy to put CO sensors in every residential building that has a gas appliance?
I'd approve every gas appliance having a CO2, carbon monoxide alarm.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think, and the other thing, if you're thinking about how you would introduce standards on existing appliances, you'd want to look at areas where people have duties of care, like landlords. You're actually flipping the discussion, like, so there's ways to approach it, but I think it should, Ted's point is exactly right. You don't want something where you've got a separate monitor and you have to, it should be, if it's a standard, you would have it on the device, as part of the device. So it's an imposition not on on the person owning the property, but on the supplier of the product.
That's exactly what we're saying.
Okay, thank you.
Can I say something looking at the time? Because Tunga is outside the discussion.
Yes. I was about to say that.
It seemed very, very significant to me when we talked about what's happening here. So hope people.
So Germany has a lot different regulations than what we have in the building space, both in energy efficiency, renewable energy, and in air quality. Would you like to talk a little bit about what happens in Germany and what you were discussing with Lidia beforehand?
Yeah. Unfortunately, to start with, you cannot currently learn much from Germany. In most developments, we are far behind. So, in e-mobility or information technology, therefore, I'm surprised that, and I can say that, Germany is so much ahead of time in indoor regulations. And we are ahead of time in all countries I've ever seen, so many, including Australia. So the reason for this is that Germans are well organized. In Germany, everything all indoor related issue work under the umbrella of the federal government, and especially under the umbrella of the Ministry of the Environment, and which means the Federal Environment Agency. They organize and control everything, which is very good. And the single states work together under the umbrella of the federal government. Well, this government has established two important committees. This is the Indoor Hygiene Committee and the Committee for Deriving Guide Values. I'm happy to be a member of both committees. I had a real honor to chair the Indoor Hygiene Committee for about 10 years. So all decisions, all statements, all regulations in Germany are harmonized. There are, of course, other opinions, other guide values, and so on, but they have no meaning at all. So with the establishment of these committees and this concept of deriving guide values, all the other guide values, we are not discussing other guide values which make sense. Other guide values, we have many in Germany. In the early 90s, we had for one single compound 10 or more guide values, but these were derived often from private organizations which have commercial interests, which is not a good idea, for example. Well, so we have these committees. Then everything stands and falls with the members of these committees. So who's a member of this committee? You cannot apply for that. You receive a call from the government and they are looking for experts. Experts means everybody's an expert, of course, in this room. I don't doubt that. But the experts have different skills. What we are looking for, or what we are calling people who have a deep understanding of science. Different of science, of chemistry, of toxicology, of engineering, of physics and everything. We have no use for people who, let's say, talk much and say nothing. So these people can multiply information, but they cannot develop guidelines. For this, you need a deep understanding. Well, so we have these committees, and then we have something I can really recommend. Sorry, Wendy, your 106 publications today do not impress me much. So, well, we have a system for 40 years, the GERES, the German Environmental Survey, which is done for 40 years, not only indoor, and it is for the indoor environment, but it includes air monitoring, it includes hair analysis, it includes dust analysis, and over the year it develops. And what is needed? Hopefully, the next one will include particles. And about 10 years ago, we started to combine these indoor environmental survey with biomonitoring. So this means now every 5 or 10 years, we have a survey in Germany which is also under the umbrella of the government with 650 housings, randomly selected, and this works. And from this, we derive not guide values, we derive reference values. But this means you have to repeat this from time to time, and every 5 or 10 years is good. So we know exactly about the concentrations of pollutants, whatever it is, in our housings, and on this we can build. Well, so then I think this is a very good idea. We do this for 30 years now. And each guide value in Germany, there are different types of guide value. I will not go into details. You can ask me later if you want. There are toxicology-based guide values, there are epidemiology-based guide values, there are hygiene guide values, and so on. Well, but each guide value has its own publication. And in the 30 years I work for these committees, I work with these committees, and I publish these guideline values, there's not a single value questioned. And this is very good. These are very, let's say, very stable over the years. Of course, they are re-evaluated from time to time. And what I can recommend for Australia doing something similar, it really works in Germany. It is not part of the law, which is not possible because it also involves the private environment. But these guide values we have are very important. They are used in trials and so on. They are decisions in the private sector or on the public sector are based on these guide values. So I can only recommend Australia to look at this, maybe to look at the guide values, And when you start here, I think you're just starting with this guide value system. Avoid reinvention of the wheel. It is no matter if it's Germany or other countries. There's so much information available, and adopting this, which is good. There's information from Japan, from France, from everywhere. You can catch up very quickly with this.
And Tunga, while you've been speaking, your watch has gone off 2 or 3 times. It's measuring something you're doing.
It's a smartwatch.
It's a CO monitor.
What? No, it's not a CO monitor. It's a heart rate monitor, for example, and of course when talking, it's changing a bit, and this is indicating.
So can I ask a few questions? So are these guide values just for residential buildings, indoor air, or for all buildings?
For all buildings.
Okay, and does the federal government, the German federal government, fund the surveys that happen?
Yes. We have each guide value has a long story. For developing a guide value takes about 1 or 2 years. So we first identify the compounds or whatever of concern, which is important. This is, for example, this is my role in this group. I'm not a toxicologist, but I read the papers. I say, hey, the latest was acrolein. It's the latest paper. Hey, acrolein is a matter of concern. Let's have a guide value for acrolein. Then it's discussed and said, hey, yes, we need a guide value for acrolein. Then we ask external experts for literature search and develop that. Then it's discussed several times. And now it's out, it's a paper out on that.
You also mentioned about the housing and being able to measuring indoor air quality and providing reference values.
Yeah.
So is that also federally funded?
Yes, of course. These reference values are part of this survey. These are statistically based. And what I forgot to mention, sorry for that, we have what we also have in Germany, what is very important for us, we have a mold guideline. A big mold guideline. It is working. And I saw your mold guideline, which is a bit old, for example. And I can only recommend to revise it.
So there has been some sort of, I guess, informal discussions about, I mean, certainly that this particular report is only based on only 106 academic published papers over a 25-year period. There is so much other data, though, that exists somewhere in Australia, and whether that's data from PhD studies, for example, I was talking to Pippa before, or whether it's from education departments who have measured schools but haven't released that data, or whether it's data from Southern Cross Station, or whether it's data from all of the consultants who have been measuring mould or other things in buildings over a long time. But we don't have a mechanism in Australia where we have a common data base where such data can be put in to try to organise, to try to get a better handle on where are we now and how are things changing. So that's maybe something to keep in mind. And at that point, we're going to stop this session just now because we need to move on to the next. But I want you to keep in mind over the next couple of days what are some of the ways forward that we can have to increase our access to the data that we know exists, but I can't find online, and no individual can find online, to be able to determine more accurately what are the buildings that we need to focus on most, what are the pollutants we need to focus on most, what can we garner from the work of other countries so that we're not repeating the work overall, etc. But at this time, I want you to please thank our panellists for their time. And I want to ask Lidia if you can please come up and do the remarks.
Well, closing remarks. Summarizing this day. What do you expect? What miracle closing remark meaningful? maybe I'll share my observations. Sometimes watching situations, developments, I kind of develop a vision. What do I see? And what I've seen today, during the day, it's like, there's a big ant nest. And that stick was put in that nest. And all the ants are going in very different directions, doing this. There is a problem. Here, there's a problem. So we're talking about this and this. This cannot be solved like this. And there's a problem like this, maybe like this, like this. So what we need is these ants realizing the problem is marching in one direction. There are lots and lots of solutions, different solutions to every building. But if the direction is that there is clean air, mandated clean air, and we are marching in this direction, so we can address those lots and lots of situations. Just think about that anthill and the stick. So we'll see what will the conclusion be on Wednesday at the end of the conference. But I'm really, really happy with where we are. That stick is there, and that stick affects not only these ants here, but this stick is kind of uncomfortably affecting many other and hopefully decision makers outside this room. Now, when I mentioned what's been happening since the pandemic on many different levels, I mentioned art. I mentioned the Queensland Gallery of Modern Art and that visual art. But there are many different areas of art, and one is writing. And we have in our community a writer, actually gifted person writing, but also painting. Can I invite here my colleague, good friend, who wrote these 2 books, and he'll now recite 3 poems. Stephen Alomas, please.
Thank you very much, Lidia. It's wonderful to actually meet you. We've been corresponding both in emails and on LinkedIn for several years now. And I'm a fellow traveller with Safe Air. I'm a human. I breathe, I think. And I'm also taking an interest in health policy. Go that first one. Now, I'm a social researcher, and I became a health policy researcher when the pandemic arrived, and I started to contribute to public opinion discussion and also some academic articles. But I also paint. And some of you will recognise an image of Peter Collignon, the quirky and eccentric member of the IECG in Canberra. But there are 3 poems, and Peter Collignon is part of one of them. Now, like hospital administrators fixated on hand-washing devices just inside the entrance in Lady Macbeth's Confessions, will these hands ne'er be clean? And clinicians unwilling to abandon their mere baggy blue mask with cheek entry holes. However, at first I got it wrong. I thought the committee was the Australian Health Principles Protection Committee, the committee which would not recognise aerosol transmission. At the very same time, I wrote this poem, the very same time that Lidia Morawska was gathering her 230 researchers. So as a citizen academic, I was not quite on top of the details. But the first poem is called Friendly Principles Proclaim Rule Number 1. Hi there, we're the friendly doctors from the AHPCC. You may have seen our smiling faces on TV. We keep Australia safe, but you need to remember our principal rule, rule number 1. It's our principle. Don't mention the M word, whispers, masks. Rule number 2, please see rule number 1. Are there exceptions, you may ask? Well, if pressed, you may mention the word under two circumstances. One preceded by the adjective dangerous, or two followed by the ironic noun messiah. And add a disparaging sneer. It has been medically proven to increase potency. Yes, you're getting it. Only we really get it. No M words, please, because we are the principals. We know. Don't worry, be happy, trust in us and keep calm and carry on. So stay safe and remember rule number one. Now, everyday realities also included, as we know, around us during the pandemic, the Karens who refused to wear masks and the other nappy wearers whose masks did not reach the mouth or nose, as in this, I'm trying to think of where that second painting has gone, somewhere there. Not that one, the third one. I need to, oops, the Chin Nappies Patrol. The squad of four in black looked like the usual goons on the trains. The big beefy one overbearing, the two medium ones, one South Asian, and the fourth a shorter woman, except they're also wearing powder blue badges. Then they spoke to the train carriage. Okay, you lot, mask on, chin nappies won't do. You can text wearing a mask, you can walk wearing a mask. Okay, yellow top, they said bluntly to the young tradie, the virus can kill you too. Mask on or off the train. Sheepishly, he extracted a mask from his work pants and complied. Now, girls, the beefy one said to a quartet of would-be stylish late tweens, you can still gossip while wearing a mask. That's what they did at Mark's balls, thought the clever young woman officer. And no, the cute mask bracelet won't do, she said to the blondest one. But the patrol cleaned up a couple more. The other tradie with a mask adorning his elbow like a warrior's amulet. The older man who somehow thought that his lower chin expelled the virus. Then, carefully adjusting their own mask, they got off, ready for the next encounter with the Chin Nappy Brigade. Then I woke up. Now, early in the pandemic, I corresponded with a number of researchers, including Nancy Baxter in Melbourne and Raina McIntyre in Sydney. Raina sent me a quotation from Max Planck, and this interested me because my point of research connection was my interest in Thomas Kuhn, who wrote about paradigm shifts in his book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And a number of people followed Kuhn and wrote about the cultural lag in the period from scientific discovery to implementation in everyday practice. Now, Max Planck argued that change comes, but very slowly. And I quote Max Planck, "A new scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because the opponents eventually die and a new generation grows up that is familiar with it. An important scientific innovation really makes the way by gradually winning over and converting its opponents. It really happens that Saul becomes Paul. What does happen is that its opponents gradually die out and that the growing generation is familiarised with ideas from the beginning. Another instance of the fact that the future lies with youth. So that might be of relevance to our discussion about government policy. Now, a third poem, a final poem, which I think is the nub of the story, called Fighting Yesterday's Enemies in the COVID Wars, with the subtitle, Is This the Miasma I See Before Me? Generals fighting the last wars, clinicians and hospital administrators far from the trenches, bowing down respectfully, worshipping the cleaning fluid dispensers in the corridor trenches of the clinics, busy washing their hands as they intone the words of Lady Macbeth, will these hands ne'er be clean? Even though they'd not heard of Ignaz Semmelweis and his fate. Happily they use spit protectors, aka floppy surgical masks, loose baggy blues. As powerful as a 1918 Enfield 303 rifle at the 21st century battlefront. They use them to fight the war against the falling drops they call droplets, and the other disease they called fomitophilia, infected surfaces. While they rejected airborne transmission as just more stale miasmic thought from yesterday. That's all, folks. Breathe well.
These are two poem books, and which Stephen sent me, and now I can a pleasure to ask you to write your autograph.
This book is called My Friends the Goldfish, and they live along the street from me, and I got to know them during the pandemic. Went along and said hello, and I still do. I don't know whether they hear me or see me, but they're also paintings as well. So thank you again, Lidia. So
While we are doing this, thank you very much all for today. And now, actually, it's not the end of work yet, because while we have welcome reception, there will be one short more panel during the welcome reception. And I'm not sure where is this happening in the exhibition hall. You can tell colleagues where they can get your...
yeah, the publisher is called Ginninderra Press.
All right, so see you at the reception. Thank you very much.